All right, folks, we're going to get started. So thanks for stopping in tonight to the library. You know, my name is Bob Murphy with Barton and Judas. I'm here tonight with my colleagues Lee Jones, Jeremy Hughes back there, and a team member, Brian Jones from Waterfront and Courier. So this is our second public workshop for the Harborside Master Plan. This is the Master Plan project. This doesn't fund the project, it's construction yet. This is the path to get to funding. So before we get there though, we want to know what we should try to fund. So that's where you guys come in. We had a public workshop in the fall. This is number 2. We'll come back to you again in the summertime with our final presentation. So that's kind of the overall look on the process. So tonight we'll be presenting what we've discussed thus far with our committee. And the designs we've come up with, and we want to hear your thoughts on that. So without further ado, we'll move into it.
Why is that not moving?
Just click on the picture.
Okay.
So some ground rules tonight. We're being live streamed. So those of you who joined us virtually, thank you. If you have any comments on what you hear tonight, feel free to drop them in the comment section on the YouTube page. Also, those of you who might be listening to us in the future, so I'm speaking into the future. If you have any comments on what you see in the presentation on the recording, please visit the project webpage where there is a comment section where you can leave your thoughts. We'll also be providing a video recording and transcript for those our hearings, so those will be made available as well. Please tell your friends that may have not been able to make it tonight that there will be a recording. So tonight we'll go over our project status and timeline. Speaking of timeline, we have a hard out tonight at 7:20. So we're going to try to move through things as quickly as we can to make sure we have enough time for your feedback by 7:20 so we can get out of here so that library staff can close up. We'll go through our public engagement that we've gone through thus far with that virtual public meeting in November, and then the survey that was conducted in January 2022. Followed by our site layouts for the entire site, followed by a more focused look at the Environmental Learning Center, and then we'll be getting feedback from you all before we wrap things up with the next steps. So our schedule. We are, as you see here, in spring of 2022. The goal here is to have draft designs ready to go for summertime so that the city can apply for funding for phase 1 improvements. After tonight, we'll take a look at your feedback, make adjustments where we see, come back to you all later in the summertime, and hopefully be able to designate phasing of this project. It's a big project, transforming Harborside into what the vision of it is. So what makes sense as a first phase will be kind of our topic of discussion over the next couple of months. Looking to finalize the plan shortly thereafter the applications go in, and then hopefully hear positive news about funding in December of 2022. So our virtual public information meeting was held in November of last year. Virtual only, so it was only available online. We kind of informed everybody about what the project was, invited some comment, and received some follow-up emails and some usage of the widget on the project website on the city's webpage. We also did some preliminary polling as part of that effort that really formed the basis for our survey that was put out in January. If you go to that, in January we received almost 1,100 responses to the survey, which is a great number. So thank you all for your participation there in the city overall. We got a lot of really good feedback on what folks want to see on the what we call the Harborside lakefront area, as well as the Harborside riverfront area and connections in between. We also got some more poignant input on the Environmental Learning Center as well. I also took a screenshot of the Facebook page that I know Courtney put up, and we also were able to mine over 200 comments on that Facebook post as well. So a lot of good feedback from all sorts of sources. Just some of the takeaways from that survey. About 1,100 folks for that 2-week period. Over half of the folks said they don't visit Harborside because there's not enough to do there. And that's kind of the approach that we've taken throughout this process. Is that folks don't really know that the recreational resource that it could be. And that's what we hope to transform it as here. A lot of folks kind of associate Harborside with utilitarian functionality. That is the Lwrp, the Water Resource Recovery Facility. And the city's unique approach of kind of embracing that aspect of being next to a recreational facility, being next to a water treatment plant, is really unique, and I think could be a really game changer for this downtown, make it really unique. So we hope to change that aspect with this project. 53% of folks access the site via Dock Street, a lesser amount via Green Street. So just interesting how folks access it from one side or the other. 65% favor active recreation as a high priority. So folks want to have stuff to actively do, not just picnic area, but whether that means a playground or other exercise trail. Those are options that we've considered that are active as opposed to passive. 54% favor whitewater recreation in the river as a high priority, plus another 32% as a medium priority. So this is looked at favorably by those who responded to the survey and the infrastructure that would go along with it. 69% believe that Harborside is lacking passive recreation as well. So folks want to have it all, which is something we're trying to accommodate with passive areas in addition to those active recreation areas. And then lastly, one of the open forum comments that was noted was that folks want to see the site appealing to people of all ages. So we try to keep that in mind. That's some of our questions that you'll see later to you all about how do we cater to all user groups? Are we overlooking user groups? Who should be targeted with some of our programming at the Environmental Learning Center? Those issues will come up later. So a little bit of the project background, and I'll go through this quickly. This is the focus of our meeting in November. But this is really a reclaimed rail yard and fuel storage area. A lot of folks who've known the site for a long time know it as an industrial area. There used to be a lot more train tracks than just the one line than there is today. So we're here to try to change that perception with this project. As we mentioned, it's located next to the Lwrp. I won't go into that any further. And then this is the implementation of the Lwrp, the city's local waterfront revitalization plan. So one of the recommendations from that plan was to focus investment at recreation at Harborside. So that's what we're trying to do with this project. That's the origin of it. So some of the goals that were stated at the onset of this to develop those key community and economic development opportunities. This is so close to downtown. This site is very walkable to it. It's very walkable distance to it, I should say. There's some infrastructure limitations that get in the way of that walkability that we're trying to address. So, and those are some of the connections you see in bullet number 2 here. How do we? People don't know that this is a recreational asset right next door. The farmers market coming down there has shed some new light on it. I think folks are starting to see the opportunities that could be at the rest of the site beyond the farmers market. And so the goal here is to have preliminary designs for the site as well as the Environmental Learning Center, which would include, recreational trail, some year-round use in different seasons that affect the Harborside. So again, the goal here, have a plan, be able to apply for funding in the summertime for phase 1 and hear about it in December. So with that, we'll go to the site context. We're loading up here, but this just gives you a sense of where the site is in relation to the rest of the city. As you can see, our site is highlighted here in this magenta color, both the Harborside Riverfront and Harborside Lakefront. Within a quarter mile of that is really downtown. It's right here, Market Street is this yellow line right here. Less than a quarter mile. And within a half mile, the whole downtown. Within a mile, you have the hospital campus as well as SUNY. So really close to a lot of things here, and of course you're right on the lake, which is one of the key, of course, recreational assets of the city. So that gives you a little bit of regional context how central this is. So with that said, I think I'll turn it over to my colleague Lee, who's going to jump right into our design concepts and take these further.
All right.
Hello all, and again, thanks for coming. Before I sort of get into the preliminary concept plans, as Bob said, we have had a public meeting already. We have public survey. And we also have a project advisory committee that's really helping us guide our thoughts and guide the vision of this land. And our own site inventory and analysis. And some of that earlier, we walked through this in the original meeting, but those maps are up on the wall and around us here, so you can sort of see some of our initial site thoughts being out there, opportunities and constraints and all of that. And the key to all of this, in terms of when I start getting into the concept plans with some specific ideas, is this is all conceptual, and this is about getting that feedback. Hey, do you want to see a playground down here? Do you want to see a walking trail? And as Bob was saying, the next goal is to get the funding to then take this to a much more detailed design, which we get into the minutia of exact sizing, exact layout. But this is that initial of what can happen down there. How can we address all these comments we've received from the public and sort of give something to everyone, basically, and sort of check all the boxes of what people are looking for. So again, I'll walk you through sort of, break the site down into individual components and walk you through some specific initial ideas. And so again, from our last one, we sort of looked at this overall site. This is the lakefront area. And looking at, as Bob was saying, we heard that people want to have passive recreation and active recreation. We obviously have the Lwrp down there. We have pedestrian circulation going through there, vehicular circulation. So we really looked at how do we sit there and accommodate everything on the site. We looked at the purple would be possibly pulling vehicular traffic off to the edge to allow the pedestrians to have less conflict and overlapping of uses. Looking at focusing passive recreation out on the point that goes into the lake, as well as having overall walking loop trails. Looking at an active recreation area, expanding on the current farmers market, and then again the possibility of the city working with subdividing the area and possibly bringing some private development in there, and how do all those work? And again, creating zones to best enhance the current opportunities within the site. And the other site is the waterfront site, the current NYSEG site that's being decommissioned and turned over to the city, and looking at how do we sort of create something new in the downtown to draw people, create a destination, which is the conversation of looking at possible adding hydraulics to the Saranac River and creating water activity. In addition to that, it could also be creating additional access to that river, fishing piers, overlooks, walking trails. And again, connecting all of that with understanding downtown is right there too, and looking at all these overall connections. So going back to the lakefront area, we've divided it into 5 different areas, and all these plans are up around you here. So after we sort of do this presentation, we are going to break off and we can get back to looking at those more closely. And then obviously this recording and this PDF can be found on the city's website after, so that everyone can look at this in more detail as needed. So we have it in 5 different areas. The farmers market area, which I had mentioned earlier, we're looking at possibly a more active recreation in that. Harborside boardwalk, of how do we sort of incorporate and use the water more than it's currently being used. Again, with the waterfront trail as well, looking at that as both access to the water as well as views. The subdivision I mentioned again is, the city looking at different ways to develop this waterfront land, and then the NYSEG site that we just looked at. So starting with the area of the Lwrp and the farmers market, this is the existing farmers market building. And, how can we develop this? And again, Brian later will talk a little bit more about the educational learning center, which is being proposed within the existing building as a new addition to that building. And then so we sort of looked at how do we then, can that overflow onto the site, and looking at other opportunities of interpretive signage, and which would explain the use of the Lwrp as well as the history of this site, and understanding how the city has developed this site over time, and looking at how do we expand on the farmers market and the possibility of incorporating a playground, a splash pad area for water play, which could then be turned off at different times. It could just be a plaza area if there wanted to be events or things like that. Pushing again, trying to separate vehicular and pedestrian activities, so pull the parking over to one side, and then creating just again open lawn areas, which would be flex space. And the other thing is sort of an overall thing of looking at with the sculpture garden that's at SUNY Plattsburgh, of pulling that and having spaces for public art on the waterfront as well, and possibly be a connecting thing through downtown to connect the campus to the waterfront. And all these plans is a key plan, just so you can get yourself your bearings on where we are at the site. And again, looking at how do we get onto the water more, we obviously already have a kayak. Oh no, this is still, sorry, the same thing with some images to help you visualize it of, expanding does the farmer's market lead out and create sort of a more urban plaza space down on that wharf that has flexibility of uses, possibility of having food trucks come down there, whether it's for events associated with the farmer's market or just at other times. Do we need a dog park down there? And is this the place to do that? Again, event spaces as well, which could be flex spaces. So we accommodate an event, but in the other time, people can just use it for any sort of recreation uses. The art walk that I mentioned, and that would just sort of be, there's so many different ways to do, whether it's a sculpture, whether it's on our ground plane, and just all these different ways to talk about the history of it, as well as current things that are happening in the city.
Now we're on the waterfront.
Now we're on the waterfront. So again, how do we use the water more? And down here is the existing boat launch and kayak launch there. And again, looking at the Lwrp of embracing it, accepting that it is staying, how do we get people to understand it more, understand the importance it is to the city? And looking at, this is the Interpretive Center, creating an interpretive walk around it as well, which would then be incorporated into the overall pedestrian walk. And looking at the idea of accommodating many users, is have different loop lengths of the walks. So you can do a smaller loop or a larger loop, whether you're walking your dog, exercise, any number of things. And again, looking at creating spaces along the water's edge. Obviously, it's beautiful down there right now. There's a lot of overgrown plant material. The views aren't there. Really looking at how do we define these spaces so people can interact with the water while on the land, but then also expanding a pedestrian walk, a boardwalk within the lake that again could have interpretive signage on it and sort of bring you on to another experience with the water itself. Again, that idea of possibly adding public art in areas, and then the hammock grove, which I had shown, like this is a space to allow people to passively recreate along the water. And something with the Lwrp is embracing it in the sense of we can screen it, we want to separate the uses because obviously it's an active facility, so we don't want pedestrians going into that space. But how do we do it that it's not a chain link fence? Maybe it's a board fence like this that actually has key openings, an interpretive sign, so you can look through it and see things that are happening there, but you don't. But we're separating the uses for the safety of the users. And then the passive recreation area, which again, there already is an existing walkway down there. There is an existing circular plaza space. And I do have existing condition photos of both ends of the tables if anyone wants to familiarize themselves again with the site. There's an existing memorial out there, and just sort of expanding on what is already there. There's already a great start on this land, and let's just expand from there. Again, expanding a looping walk throughout, but then also while we're proposing a playground near the farmer's market, also looking at nature play things that are basically expanded throughout the park. So it's not a formal playground, but having logs or boulders or things like that when you're walking with your kids, you just keep them walking or climbing on things and experiencing the area as basically one large nature playground. Like in this sort of picture sort of highlights that. And again, these pictures are just conceptual, just getting ideas and thoughts into our minds. And again, looking at, while we have this circular open space now, maybe there's the ability, maybe that's the opportunity to enhance that and possibly provide shade. Something else that's crucial down there is the elements. Today is one of those wonderfully windy days. It's actually windy in all of New York State and not just Plattsburgh today. But looking at understanding that, and but also understanding the summertime with sun, it does get hot. So providing whether it's shade trees or shade structures, but understanding again to accommodate all the users, and then with the wind, defining areas maybe could be sheltered from it so that the site can be used year round.
One thing I'll add to this as well is this enlargement plan C is where you'll really see where we've tried to bring transportation away from the waterfront. Right now, that's where the road loops back to Dock Street. We're trying to take that road and bring it against the tracks so that area close to the water is turned over to recreation and to pedestrians. So that's where you'll see it here. You'll also see it on the next slide.
And the key here is this is the possible subdivision and the city looking again with a private developer. And the key here is that this design, what the city and the residents and the visitors need, is a priority on this site. That it wouldn't be a harsh property line that's private versus public, and that the public space is allowed to bleed into is sort of the key. And again, the final designs of what the city wants and what the residents want is what's going to guide what ultimately happens down here. And then finally is the Nice Lake site again. This is really looking at it as a flexible space. While there is opportunity to have an athletic field there, it can also just be an open lawn space. Really looking at the key of the pedestrian bridges that are there and expanding this loop walk. You have the trail that goes on the lake over on the east side, to the east of here, but then also just really looking at having continuous pedestrian trails that are off of the roads and separated from vehicles. And then the key here is that possibility of adding hydraulics within the river itself to expand the uses, to possibly add whitewater rafting, kayaking, or tubing, which the image is on the next one, and looking at spaces of, in addition to creating this water activity, creating areas along it like the bridges and or overlooks that people can watch that activity and or experience it even when the things might not be going on in the river. Again, creating overlooks, creating some possible grassy knolls, which will sort of act as like a sculptural art piece, but also just acts as, again, like that nature playground without it being a formal playground. And again, there's the precedent images are all these images that we are showing you, possible ideas. And the final piece is signage throughout, wayfinding signage, how to get around, how to point us in the direction of the downtown or the lake trail, the rail trail that heads south, and just, throughout the site. Where's the playground? Where's the splash pad? Where's the work? And the city has already, begun work on a whole wayfinding signage campaign. You can see some of the graphics there in the family, of this sign family, of how that will look. And expanding that, the wayfinding, also then how to do interpretive signage creatively. Obviously, the typical one is a board, a panel, but are there other ways to incorporate it without it? It's in the ground plane to sort of give him some historical footprints of what was once there. Art on the ground plane, like we talked about. Again, these are some in the current signage family that we're looking at. Is on the ground plane, directional signage as well. So a dot on the ground is telling you how to get from one place to another. I think the next page also shows that we can incorporate interpretive things into functional seats as well. Make a bench, could sit there and give key dates, and they just sort of overlapping of uses so that everything just doesn't have one purpose. How do we sit there and create this space that has tons of different ways to use it and interact with it, while giving a history of the space and information of the environment of the work, which I was going to get you back to talking about the Environmental Learning Center.
Well, thank you, Lee. So that gives you a context of the whole site, how it all works together. But the key component of it is the Environmental Learning Center that we think stirs the drink, so to speak, of the entire Harborside area. So I just wanted to provide a little introduction to that first, before I turn it over to my colleague Brian Jones here to go through some of our initial renderings. But the purpose of the ELC is really to develop that initial layout, the programming, analysis, and operations to try to figure out how we're gonna get this facility off the ground. Who's going to be making the decisions that can generate revenue and keep the project going. The site is envisioned to focus on the water cycle itself, as well as some moving pieces around the water cycle, whether that be local ecology, local history, local climate, those sorts of things. But the main piece is going to be the water cycle, how the Lwrp fits into that, so that you're not just bothered by what the Lwrp does, and you might smell from time to time, but you're really understanding the importance of it, what it's there for in your everyday life and the functioning of the city of Plattsburgh. So this effort with the layout program is really led by our teammates, Harborside and Courier, and having the exhibits. After tonight, we will be turning those guys loose on developing some conceptual programming after we hear what you all think. That will go into what the vision is for this particular site. And just to give you some examples of what this site could be, some sort of sister sites, if you will, would be the Echo Center across the lake in Burlington, as well as the Wild Center in Tupper Lake. So we want to have those in your head when you're thinking about what the ELC could be. So before we move into our conceptual layouts, I do want to give John Ruff a chance to kind of open up what his vision is of this, what the site could be overall. Just a brief introduction.
Yeah, not just my vision, but it's things we've been talking about. If you rewind to take 30 or so years, the waterfront was an industrial wasteland. There was an old rail yard down there. There was a marine salvage yard. There were brownfield contamination sites. And over the last 20 years, most of that's been either eliminated and moved elsewhere, or it's been remediated. There's been amenities that have been put in. It's kind of nice with the wastewater plant being down there with all this other stuff, because it drew attention away from the wastewater plant. But back then, we also realized that, hey, once all this gets cleaned up, this Lwrp is going to be the last thing standing, and it's not the most attractive facility. It's not perceived in a very strong light. The polite description of it was the poop plant. You can imagine some other words that were probably used in that context. And it is, it does treat poop, but it serves a very critical function in our community and our quality of life. So back then we realized that in order for this Lwrp to not be an impediment to the full use and enjoyment of the waterfront as it was transformed, that the plant itself would have to be transformed. It's too expensive to relocate. There's really no other place to put it. So the vision has always been to transform what the plant looks like and to create an understanding of what it does. So we were working down that road. We actually gotten some state monies to upgrade the architecture of the facility and add a nice entrance. Then along came Harborside master plan. We kind of slowed that architectural stuff down to let it catch up so that Harborside master plan and the Lwrp architecture are kind of going on simultaneous parallel tracks. And then the idea of the Environmental Learning Center propped up, and we started thinking, hey, this is perfect. I've spent hours and hours and hours thinking about the details, but I'm not going to talk about that now. But the type of place we're talking about is a destination or an attraction, a place that people want to go, where they want to be, where they want to socialize, where they want to learn, where they want to have an experience. So that's kind of the holistic bit of what we're trying to create. And we're trying to do it with a water cycle based theme. Here's how water comes out of the sky. Here's how it gets made clean for drinking water and fire protection and cooking and flushing. Here's what all the things we do to pollute it. Here's what needs to happen at a Lwrp in order to make that water safe to reintroduce back into this water cycle so that it doesn't harm public health or the environment. So it's an experience, an educational experience we're trying to create, but also a place where people want to go and just have a good time. Not just at the learning center, but this whole waterfront master plan thing we got going on, all 4 seasons of the year. So
that's perfect, John. Yeah, Thank you for sharing that. And I know John's got a good way of kind of bringing the whole history of this effort together. So I want to thank you, John, for making those comments. So we're going to talk a little bit about programming and design. Now, with this particular site, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Jones, who's headed up that effort before we move into public feedback.
Good evening. Yeah, to touch on what John said, this is a unique take on the wastewater treatment plant. Most towns, cities ignore it or they hide it in trees. We're not doing it in this case. We are actually celebrating it and making it a destination, like we said. So since the rest of the plan is very kind of static geometry, the environmental learning center is it's dynamic. We're trying to draw attention to it. So we have curved roofs, which kind of mimic nature, mimic water. It's very visually open with glass. And basically the ground floor of this building is mainly exhibits and circulation space. And then the upper floor would be observation of the plant and then views of the lake beyond. So it's pretty nice views up there too.
That would be.
This is looking back towards the farmers market. I'm kind of hovering over the plant. And so this shows you the outside observation deck once you get upstairs. And then there's an interior observation deck. So in inclement weather, you can still use the building, use the space. And then it's nice out, go outside too. See the light. It's just a closer rendering. Same kind of idea like I was talking about. I'm using a lot of bright colors to draw your eye to the building. The building actually has like a wayfinding device too. So when you're down there, you're going to be drawn to this area just by the architecture. And then like the dynamic curved roofs, bright colors, glass. And these are the floor plans. They're kind of hard to see. But basically the ground floor has an entry vestibule, has all exhibit open space on the ground floor, has an open stair that comes up to the second level, has an elevator, bathrooms. And then the second story has, like I said, it has an interior observation area, it has an exterior observation area. And that observation area is actually be built on top of the existing building. Right? Yeah. And here's some interior views, very open space. It's like a double volume type space. There could be exhibits that are on the floor, they could be hanging, they could be mounted on walls. Just very open and inviting type space. That's just more views. Because once you draw it up, you can show lots of things very easily. So, yeah, I mean, and the other thing I want to touch on is we're also covering the building with new exterior materials just to dress it up. Because right now it's just concrete. So we want to dress it up, kind of downplay it, so to speak, so that the environmental learning center gets the focus. And there's a nighttime view. So again, we wanted to try to have the building serve as a wayfinding device. So this whole orange stair tower and elevator would almost glow, and then the whole building would glow too.
Can I ask just a quick question? When you say are you covering the tank areas?
Covering the tank areas.
Oh, when you say you're gonna cover-
No, they would be left open. But there's work underway for odor control and that kind of thing.
You should be looking out over the tank areas from that top area into the lake beyond.
Okay.
So thank you, Brian. So as Brian went through, we can go back to next steps. We'll go through this at the end, but the environmental learning center acts as kind of a wayfinding beacon almost for the entire site. Right now, it's pretty low lying area. You can see the train station to one side elevated, but this new facility will hopefully draw folks' attention so they know where they are on the site relative to this this new shiny environmental learning center. The other thing I want to mention as well is the possibility to expand that interior space out if we think that would fit the needs of the city better. One of the other things that's come up is the ability to potentially have events inside the learning center, much like you might see at the Echo Center or at the Wild Center. So is that warranted? Do we need space for other amenities within there? That's what we're trying to figure out with you all tonight. In addition to your thoughts on our other parts of the whole entire Harborside site. So with that said, we're going to break up into a couple groups here. So we have 6:36 right now. Before we get there, I wanted to see if there are any general questions before we get into public feedback. No? Okay, no, not a problem. So what we're going to spend the next half hour, 40 minutes doing is intensively going over both the overall Harborside site at this end of the room, and then the environmental learning center components at this end of the room. We're going to try to spend roughly 10-15 minutes before we swap. So if you pick one side, you're worried about missing out the other, you're going to have time to do that. So if I could get you moving around and then moving over from one side of the site to the other, or room to the other, please do. We also have targeted questions that we want to go through with you all in addition to kind of free-flowing conversation. And those questions are up on the boards here. So please gather around one of the two ends of the room and we'll move to this next feedback.
Just wrap things over here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us online. That'll conclude our live stream for tonight. We will post the results of our feedback, so stay tuned on the project website for more information. Thanks again.